The wind shrieked through the narrow canyon like a banshee, carrying snow that cut like broken glass, and huddled beneath the overhang of rock was a figure so still that Garrett Callahan almost mistook her for a pile of discarded fabric until he saw her shiver. His horse stamped nervously as he dismounted, the January cold of 1878 biting through his heavy coat. But it was nothing compared to what this woman must be feeling in her thin traveling dress and torn shawl. Her lips had gone blue, her dark hair was matted with ice, and when her eyes fluttered open to look at him, they held the glazed quality of someone who had already started to give up. "Madam, can you hear me?" Garrett asked, crouching beside her and immediately shrugging off his sheepskin coat. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too violently. He wrapped the coat around her shoulders and felt how cold she was, how her whole body trembled with an intensity that frightened him. "I need to get you somewhere warm. Can you ride?" She managed the smallest shake of her head, and Garrett did not hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, surprised at how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with delicate features that would have been pretty if they were not currently contorted with pain and cold. He secured her on his horse and climbed up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady while the other hand held the reins. She slumped against him immediately, seeking whatever warmth his body could provide. The ride back to Ellsworth took nearly 2 hours through the blizzard, and Garrett talked to her the entire time, keeping his voice low and steady, telling her about anything he could think of just to keep her conscious. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised, about the town they were heading toward. She did not respond, but he felt her breathing, felt the slight pressure of her body against his, and he rode faster. Ellsworth appeared through the white curtain of snow like a mirage, its buildings dark and hunched against the storm. Garrett guided his horse straight to Doc Morrison's place, a small house on the edge of town with a lamp burning in the window. He dismounted carefully, pulling the woman down into his arms again, and kicked at the door with his boot. Doc Morrison opened it immediately, his weathered face creasing with concern when he saw what Garrett carried. "Get her inside, quickly now." The warmth of the house hit them like a wall, and the woman in Garrett's arms made a small sound, something between a whimper and a sigh. Doc Morrison directed him to a small bedroom where he laid her on the bed, and then the doctor shooed him out while he worked. Garrett stood in the main room, dripping melted snow onto the wooden floor, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He had found her just in time. Another hour and she would have been dead. Doc Morrison emerged 20 minutes later, wiping his hands on a cloth. "She'll live, thanks to you. Severe exposure to the cold, some frostbite on her fingers and toes, but I think we caught it before any permanent damage set in. She's sleeping now. Her body needs rest more than anything." "Who is she?" Garrett asked. "She has not been conscious enough to tell me," Doc Morrison said. "But from the looks of her dress and the quality of the fabric, despite its current state, I would say she is from a family with some means. The question is what she was doing out in that storm." Garrett stayed at the doctor's house for another hour, but the woman did not wake, so finally he headed back out into the storm to take his horse to the livery and then make his way to the boarding house where he kept a room when he came into town. Sleep did not come easily that night. He kept seeing her face, so pale and still, kept feeling the weight of her in his arms and the way she had pressed against him seeking warmth. He had saved her life, but he knew nothing about her, not even her name. Morning brought a break in the storm, though the sky remained heavy and gray. Garrett was back at Doc Morrison's house before 8 o'clock, stamping snow off his boots on the porch. The doctor let him in with a knowing smile. "She's awake," he said. Been asking about the man who found her. Garrett felt something flutter in his chest as he removed his hat and followed the doctor to the small bedroom. The woman was sitting up in bed, wrapped in quilts, her dark hair brushed and falling over her shoulders. In the daylight, without the pallor of near death on her face, she was beautiful. Her eyes were a remarkable shade of green, bright and alert, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him pause in the doorway. "You saved my life," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "Doc Morrison told me you rode through the blizzard to bring me here." "Could not leave you out there, madam," Garrett said, turning his hat in his hands. "Name's Garrett Callahan." "Delilah Matthews," she said, and then her eyes filled with tears that she tried to blink away. "I apologize. I am not usually so emotional, but I thought I was going to die out there. I had accepted it, and then you appeared like some kind of guardian angel." "No angel, just a rancher heading back to town," Garrett said, but he stepped closer to the bed. "What happened? How did you end up out there alone?" Delilah's face darkened, anger replacing the tears. "The stagecoach I was traveling on was robbed. 3 men on horses, all with their faces covered. They took everyone's valuables and then ordered us all off the coach. The driver tried to argue, said the storm was getting worse, but they fired a shot over his head and that was that. They drove off with the coach and left 6 of us standing in the snow." "6," Garrett said sharply. "Where are the others?" "We tried to stay together, but the wind was so strong, visibility was nearly nothing. We got separated. I tried to follow what I thought were voices, but I only got more lost. I found that overhang and decided to stop before I walked off a cliff or something worse." Garrett looked at Doc Morrison. "We need to organize a search party." "Already sent word to Sheriff Dalton," the doctor said. "He rounded up some men at first light. They have been out for about an hour now." "I should be with them," Garrett said, already turning toward the door. "Mr. Callahan," Delilah called out, and he stopped, looking back at her. "Thank you, truly. I owe you my life." Their eyes met and held for a moment, and Garrett felt that flutter in his chest again, stronger this time. He nodded and left, heading straight for the sheriff's office to get a fresh horse and join the search. The next few hours were grim work. The search party found 2 of the other passengers within a mile of town, an older couple who had managed to stay together and find shelter in an abandoned line shack. They were in rough shape but alive. The other 3 were found by noon, and the news was not good. 2 men and a woman, all frozen to death, huddled together in what must have been a final attempt to share body heat. Garrett helped carry their bodies back to town, his jaw tight with anger. Those robbers had killed these people as surely as if they had shot them. Sheriff Dalton was a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. He questioned the survivors, including Delilah, though he did it gently given what she had been through. The descriptions of the robbers were vague, only that they were average height, wore long coats and bandanas over their faces, and rode dark horses. It was not much to go on, but the sheriff promised to send word to neighboring towns and keep his eyes open. Garrett found himself returning to Doc Morrison's house every day for the next week. He told himself it was just to check on Delilah's recovery, but the truth was more complicated. There was something about her that drew him in, a strength beneath the surface that impressed him. Despite nearly dying, despite losing 3 fellow passengers to the cold, she remained composed and determined. She asked the doctor endless questions about her treatment, wanting to understand exactly what had happened to her body and how it was healing. She read every book the doctor lent her and asked Garrett about the town, about the territory, about his ranch. "I was traveling from St. Louis to Denver," she told him one afternoon when he brought her a basket of food from the hotel restaurant. "My father arranged a position for me as a teacher there. He thinks I need to be married and settled, and when I showed no interest in any of the suitable men he paraded in front of me, he decided getting me away from St. Louis might help me see reason. You did not want to marry any of them? Garrett asked, sitting in the chair beside the bed. They were boring, Delilah said frankly. Every one of them. Sons of my father's business associates, men who wanted a decorative wife to host their dinner parties and produce their heirs and never express an opinion more complicated than what color drapes to hang. I want more than that from life. What do you want? Garrett found himself asking, genuinely curious. Delilah was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands where the frostbite was healing, leaving her fingertips tender but intact. I want to matter. I want to do something meaningful. Teaching seemed like a good option, but honestly, even that was just an escape from the life my father had planned. Now, after what happened, after nearly dying out there in the cold, I realize I do not want to just escape. I want to choose something, actively choose it, because it is what I want, not because it is the least objectionable option. Garrett understood that feeling more than she knew. He had left his family's shipping business in Boston 5 years ago, much to his father's fury, because he could not stand another day in an office shuffling papers and discussing profit margins. He had wanted space, land, something real beneath his hands. The ranch outside Ellsworth had been struggling when he bought it, but he had turned it around through sheer determination and hard work. It was his, built by his own choices, and there was pride in that. I think I understand, he said, and when Delilah looked up at him, something passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits. By the second week, Delilah was well enough to leave the bed and move around the house. Doc Morrison declared her recovery remarkable and said she could leave his care soon, which prompted the practical question of where she would go. The stagecoach company had sent an agent to interview the survivors, offering condolences and a refund of the ticket price, but nothing more. Delilah had lost her luggage and most of her money to the robbers, keeping only a small purse that had been hidden in her petticoats. It was not enough to book new travel to Denver, and she had no desire to return to St. Louis. I could wire my father for money, she said to Garrett one evening as they sat in Doc Morrison's small parlor. The doctor had been called out to attend to a birth on a farm outside town, leaving them alone. But if I do that, he will insist I come home immediately, and I will be right back where I started, suffocating in that house with him trying to marry me off to the next boring candidate. You could stay here, Garrett said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. Ellsworth, I mean. Find work here until you decide what you want to do next. What kind of work? Delilah asked. There is no school here, is there? No formal school, Garrett admitted. Most families teach their children at home if they teach them at all, but there are other options. The hotel sometimes needs help, or the general store. Delilah wrinkled her nose. I do not think I am suited for that kind of work. Not that there is anything wrong with it, but I have no experience and I suspect Mrs. Patterson at the general store would not appreciate me breaking half her inventory while I learned. Garrett laughed, the sound surprising him. He had not laughed much in recent years, too focused on work and building his ranch. You might be right about that. Mrs. Patterson guards her store like a dragon guards treasure. What about your ranch? Delilah asked suddenly. Do you need help there? Garrett blinked in surprise. Ranch work is hard physical labor. Cattle do not care if you are tired or sore. They need tending regardless of the weather. I am not afraid of hard work, Delilah said, a stubborn set to her jaw that Garrett was beginning to recognize. And you said yourself that I am stronger than I look. I survived that blizzard, did I not? You did, Garrett said slowly, his mind turning over the possibility. He did need help, actually. His ranch hand, Tom, had left a month ago to get married and move to Dodge City, and Garrett had been managing alone since then. It was exhausting, especially in winter when the cold made every task twice as difficult. But hiring Delilah would mean having her at the ranch, seeing her every day, and that thought made his heart beat faster in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. "Let me think about it," he said finally, and Delilah nodded, though he could see the disappointment in her eyes. That night, Garrett barely slept. He kept imagining Delilah at the ranch, kept picturing her in his kitchen, in his barn, riding beside him across the winter fields. It was a dangerous fantasy because he knew he was already half in love with her, had been since that moment in the storm when she had pressed against him seeking warmth and safety. But what could he offer her? He was a rancher with a modest but comfortable living, while she was clearly from a wealthy family, educated and refined. Once she had time to recover fully and think clearly, she would realize she belonged in a city, in a life of comfort, not on a ranch in Kansas. But the next morning, when he returned to Doc Morrison's house, Delilah met him at the door already dressed in a simple calico dress the doctor's wife had lent her. Her green eyes were bright with determination. "I have been thinking all night," she said, before Garrett could even greet her. "I know you need help at your ranch and I need a place to stay and work. This could benefit both of us. I promise I am a quick learner and I will work harder than any hand you have ever hired." "Delilah," Garrett started, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I know what you are thinking. That I am a city girl who does not know the first thing about ranching, and you are right. But I mean what I said before. I want to choose my own life, and I choose this. I choose to stay here and learn something new and make my own way. Please, Garrett, give me a chance." The way she said his name, earnest and hopeful, made his resolve crumble. "All right," he said, and watched her face light up with joy. "But we need to set some ground rules. You will have your own room, separate quarters. The work will be hard and I will expect you to pull your weight. And if at any point you decide this is not for you, I will help you get wherever you want to go next. No judgment, no questions asked." "Agreed," Delilah said immediately, sticking out her hand for him to shake. Her grip was firm despite the lingering tenderness in her fingers. 2 days later, Garrett brought Delilah out to his ranch. It was a modest spread, about 200 acres of grazing land with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. The house had been built by the previous owner, a German immigrant who had put care into the construction, with thick walls and a good stone fireplace. Garrett had added his own touches over the years, building a larger porch and expanding the barn. Delilah stepped down from the wagon and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The land stretched out in rolling hills, white with snow now, but Garrett could imagine it in spring and summer, green and alive. The cattle were in the near pastures, dark shapes against the snow, their breath steaming in the cold air. "It is beautiful," Delilah said softly, and Garrett felt a surge of pride. "Come inside, I will show you around," he said, grabbing her small bag of borrowed items from the wagon. The house was warm, the fire he had built before leaving that morning still burning well. The main floor had a large kitchen with a wood stove, a dining area, and a sitting room with comfortable furniture. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms. Garrett showed Delilah to the smallest, which had a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the front pastures. "This was going to be Tom's room before he decided to leave," Garrett explained. "It is not much, but it is warm and the bed is comfortable." "It is perfect," Delilah said, setting her bag on the bed. "Thank you, Garrett, for everything. I will not let you down." The first week was an adjustment for both of them. Garrett woke Delilah before dawn that first morning and took her out to the barn to teach her how to feed the horses and muck out the stalls. She wrinkled her nose at the smell but did not complain, throwing herself into the work with determination even when it was clear she had no idea what she was doing. He showed her how to carry water without spilling half of it, how to pitch hay, how to check the horses' hooves for stones or injuries. Feeding the cattle was next, which meant loading hay onto a wagon and driving it out to the pastures. Delilah had never driven a wagon before, and her first attempt was comically bad, the horses completely ignoring her commands until Garrett stepped in. But she practiced every day, and by the end of the week, she could manage it on her own, her face flushed with pride when the horses actually responded to her directions. The physical work was clearly hard on her. Garrett noticed her wincing when she thought he was not looking, her hands blistering and then callousing, her whole body aching from muscles she had never used before. But she never complained, never asked for special treatment. At night, they would sit by the fire after dinner, both too tired to talk much, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. Garrett found himself looking forward to those evenings more than he wanted to admit. Delilah would curl up in the armchair with a cup of tea, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and read or sometimes just stare into the fire, lost in thought. He would pretend to look over his account books, but really he was watching her, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way she absently tucked her hair behind her ear, the small smile that played on her lips when she read something amusing. He was in trouble and he knew it. This was more than attraction, more than simple affection. He was falling in love with her, deeply and irrevocably, and every day she spent at the ranch only made it worse. The way she laughed when one of the barn cats climbed into her lap. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on a task. The way she looked at him sometimes, her green eyes soft and warm, and he wondered if maybe, just maybe, she felt something too. But Garrett held back, kept his feelings locked away. Delilah was here because she needed work and a place to stay, not because she wanted romance. She had told him herself that she was tired of men trying to marry her, tired of being pursued for the wrong reasons. The last thing he wanted was to make her uncomfortable or pressure her into anything. So he remained friendly but distant, keeping a careful space between them even as he yearned to close it. February arrived with slightly milder weather, the worst of the winter storms passing. Garrett decided it was time to check on the cattle more thoroughly, riding out to make sure none had been injured or gotten sick. He brought Delilah with him, putting her on his gentlest mare while he rode his gelding. She had been practicing her riding around the ranch yard, but this was her first time going out into the open range. They rode for hours, checking the herd, and Garrett found himself explaining everything to her. How to read the signs of a healthy cow versus a sick one. How to look for predators or signs of rustlers. How the ranch operated and what challenges they faced. Delilah listened intently, asking smart questions, and Garrett realized she had a natural intelligence that he had only glimpsed before. She saw connections and patterns quickly, understood the business side as well as the physical labor. They stopped to eat lunch on a small rise that overlooked most of the ranch. Garrett had packed sandwiches and coffee in a canteen, and they sat on a fallen log, eating and looking out over the snow-covered land. The sun was bright, making the whole world sparkle, and the air was crisp but not painfully cold. "I understand now why you left Boston," Delilah said suddenly. "Why you gave up your family's business for this. There is a freedom here that you cannot find in a city." "You know about Boston?" Garrett asked in surprise. "Doc Morrison mentioned it," Delilah said. "He said you gave up a fortune to come west and work with your hands." "Your father must have been furious." "That is putting it mildly," Garrett said with a humorless laugh. "He disowned me, said I was throwing away everything he had built, But I could not stay there, Delilah. I was suffocating, just going through the motions of a life that was not mine. Out here, every decision I make is my own. Every success and every failure belongs to me. It matters in a way that shuffling papers in an office never did. I envy you, Delilah said softly. You had the courage to walk away and build something new. I was just running away, not running toward anything. You are building something now, Garrett said, looking at her. In just a few weeks you have learned so much. You are good at this, Delilah. You have a feel for the work. She met his eyes, and the look that passed between them was charged, electric. Garrett felt his breath catch, felt the urge to lean toward her, to close the distance and kiss her. But before he could move, Delilah looked away, her cheeks flushing pink. We should head back, she said, standing quickly and brushing crumbs from her skirt. There is still work to do before dark. The moment was broken, and Garrett nodded, standing as well. They rode back in silence, but something had shifted between them, a tension that had not been there before, and Garrett did not know if that was good or bad. That night, Garrett lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He kept replaying that moment on the rise, the way Delilah had looked at him, the way his heart had hammered in his chest. He wanted her, not just physically, though there was definitely that, but in every way that mattered. He wanted her laugh in his house, her opinions at his dinner table, her presence beside him as they built this life together. But wanting and having were two different things, and he did not know how to bridge that gap without risking everything they had already built. March brought the first real signs of spring, the snow melting into mud and the cattle growing restless in anticipation of green grass. It also brought new challenges. One of the cows gave birth to a calf that was too weak to stand, and Garrett brought it into the barn to care for it personally. Delilah helped, staying up with him through 2 long nights as they took turns feeding the calf with a bottle and keeping it warm. It was during the second night, around 3 in the morning, when exhaustion and proximity finally broke down the walls Garrett had been carefully maintaining. They were sitting in the hay, the calf asleep between them, the barn lit by a single lantern. Delilah's head drooped onto Garrett's shoulder, and without thinking he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. She sighed and curled into him, her body fitting against his like she belonged there. "Garrett," she murmured, half asleep, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked softly, his heart beginning to pound. "I am happy here," she said. "Happier than I have ever been, and it is not just the ranch or the work or the freedom. It is you, being near you. I think about you constantly, wonder what you are thinking, hope that maybe you feel even a fraction of what I feel." Garrett went very still. "Delilah, are you saying—" She lifted her head to look at him, and in the dim lantern light her eyes were luminous. "I am saying I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen. I know I should not. I know I am here as your employee and I do not want to make things complicated, but I cannot help it. You are good and kind and strong, and when you look at me, I feel like I matter, like I am seen for who I really am, not who someone wants me to be." Garrett's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You think you are the only one feeling this? I have been in love with you since that first day at Doc Morrison's, when you looked at me and thanked me for saving your life. Every day since has only made it stronger. I did not say anything because I did not want to pressure you, did not want you to feel obligated because I gave you work." "Obligated," Delilah said, and then she laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the quiet barn. "Garrett, I would do anything to be near you. If you told me to leave tomorrow, it would break my heart." "I would never tell you to leave," Garrett said fiercely. "I want you here always. I want you as my partner in the ranch and in life. I want to build a future with you, Delilah, if you will have me." Her answer was to lean in and kiss him, her lips soft and warm against his. Garrett felt electricity shoot through his entire body, felt years of loneliness and careful control dissolve in an instant. He kissed her back with all the pent-up longing he had been suppressing, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her close. She made a small sound of pleasure and deepened the kiss, her fingers tangling in his hair. They broke apart eventually, both breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. Garrett felt like his heart might burst from his chest, felt a happiness so complete it was almost overwhelming. "Marry me," he said, the words tumbling out without planning. "I know it is fast, I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything. Marry me, Delilah." Tears sparkled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, absolutely yes." They kissed again, and the calf between them made a complaining sound, reminding them of its presence. They broke apart laughing, and Garrett felt like the luckiest man alive. The next weeks passed in a blur of joy and planning. They decided to get married as soon as possible, neither wanting to wait longer than necessary. Delilah wrote to her father, informing him of her decision. She did not ask for his permission or blessing, simply stated the facts, that she was marrying a rancher in Kansas and would not be returning to St. Louis. Garrett half expected an angry father to appear demanding his daughter back, but instead, a letter arrived with a terse congratulations and a surprisingly generous check as a wedding gift. Perhaps her father had finally accepted that Delilah would live life on her own terms. They were married in early April in Ellsworth's small church, with Doc Morrison and his wife as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. News of a wedding always drew a crowd in a frontier town, especially when it involved the mysterious woman who had survived the blizzard and the rancher who had saved her. Delilah wore a simple white dress that the seamstress in town had made, and she looked so beautiful that Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion when she walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was short but meaningful, the reverend speaking about love and partnership and the journey they were beginning together. When Garrett said his vows, promising to love and cherish Delilah for all his days, he meant every word with an intensity that surprised even him. And when Delilah made the same promises back, her voice steady and clear, her eyes locked on his, he knew she meant them just as much. They kissed as husband and wife to applause and cheers, and then everyone moved to the hotel for a reception that the town had enthusiastically organized. There was music and dancing and more food than seemed possible for such a small community to produce. Garrett danced with his bride, holding her close and whispering in her ear about how much he loved her, how he could not wait to start their life together. "We already started it," Delilah whispered back, her eyes sparkling. "The moment you found me in that storm, our life together began. Everything since has been leading to this moment." They left the reception early, amid knowing smiles and ribald jokes, and rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. The spring air was warm, the smell of new grass and earth filling the night, and everything felt fresh and full of possibility. That night, in Garrett's bedroom, which was now their bedroom, they came together with a passion and tenderness that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Delilah was shy at first, admitting it was her first time, but Garrett was patient and gentle, showing her with his hands and his mouth and his body how much he loved her. They learned each other slowly, discovering what brought pleasure, what made the other gasp or moan. And when they finally joined, it felt like coming home, like two pieces that had always been meant to fit together. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Delilah's head on Garrett's chest, his fingers stroking through her hair. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Deliriously," she answered, pressing a kiss to his chest. I never imagined I could feel this way. It is like I spent my whole life waiting for something without knowing what it was, and then you appeared in a blizzard and suddenly everything made sense." "I know exactly what you mean," Garrett said, tightening his arms around her. "I love you, Mrs. Callahan." "I love you too, Mr. Callahan," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Garrett's life. Delilah threw herself into being a rancher's wife, with the same determination she had shown as his employee. She managed the household with efficiency, learning to cook from a combination of trial and error and advice from the women in town. Her first few attempts at bread were disasters that even the chickens would not eat, but she persisted, and within a month, she was producing loaves that were actually quite good. But Delilah did not limit herself to domestic tasks. She continued to work alongside Garrett on the ranch, riding out to check the herd, helping with the spring branding, even assisting when they had to doctor a sick cow. She had a way with the animals that surprised him, a calm confidence that soothed them even during stressful procedures. They made a good team, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with looks and small gestures as much as words. In June, they hired 2 new ranch hands, young men from town who needed work. This freed up more of their time, and Garrett used it to expand the herd, purchasing more cattle and extending his grazing land. Delilah had suggested they also start breeding horses, arguing that there was a growing market for good ranch horses, and they had the space and resources. Garrett agreed, impressed by her business acumen, and they purchased 3 quality mares and a strong stallion to start. That summer, they took their first trip together, traveling to Dodge City for supplies and spending 2 nights at a hotel. It felt like a honeymoon, a chance to just be together without the constant demands of the ranch. They walked the streets hand in hand, dined at a restaurant, and spent long hours in their hotel room making love and talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Delilah said one night as they lay in bed. "At least 3 or 4. I want our house to be full of noise and laughter. I want to teach them to ride and read and think for themselves." "I want that too," Garrett said, imagining it. Little boys and girls with Delilah's green eyes and his stubborn streak, running through the ranch yard, learning to love the land the way he did. "We should start practicing." Delilah laughed and swatted his chest, but then she kissed him, and practicing turned into something much more serious and wonderful. Fall arrived with its usual beauty, the prairie grasses turning gold and red, the air crisp and clean. The cattle were fat and healthy, the horse breeding program was off to a good start, and the ranch was prospering. Garrett and Delilah celebrated their first Thanksgiving together with Doc Morrison and his wife as guests, along with the 2 ranch hands and several people from town who had nowhere else to go. The house was full and loud and joyful, and as Garrett looked around the table at all these people, his wife beside him smiling and laughing, he felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. In December, Delilah told him she was pregnant. They had been in the barn checking on the horses, and she just turned to him and said the words simply, her eyes bright with excitement and a little fear. Garrett picked her up and spun her around, his shout of joy startling the horses. They would have a baby, a child of their own, tangible proof of their love. "Are you happy?" Delilah asked, the same question he had asked her on their wedding night. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy," Garrett answered honestly. "You have given me everything, Delilah. A true partner, a future, now a child. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." "You already deserve me," she said, cupping his face in her hands. "We deserve each other. That is what makes this so perfect." The winter of 1879 was milder than the previous year, for which they were both grateful. Delilah continued working on the ranch as long as she could, though Garrett was increasingly protective, always worrying she was doing too much. She would laugh at him and tell him women had been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing physical work. But she did eventually agree to limit herself to lighter tasks as her belly grew. In late March, Delilah went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that scared Garrett half to death. He stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths, feeling helpless as she struggled. Doc Morrison worked calmly and efficiently, and finally, after 18 hours, a baby's cry filled the room. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squalling infant. "Healthy lungs on this one." Garrett looked at his son, red-faced and angry at being pulled into the world, and felt tears stream down his face. Delilah reached for the baby, and Doc Morrison placed him in her arms, and the look of pure love on her face as she gazed down at their child made Garrett fall in love with her all over again. "What should we name him?" she asked softly, her finger tracing the baby's tiny features. "What about James?" Garrett suggested. "After my grandfather. He was the only one in my family who supported my decision to come west." "James Callahan," Delilah said, testing it out. "It is perfect. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, little one." Being parents was simultaneously the hardest and most rewarding thing either of them had ever done. James was a demanding baby, colicky and fussy, keeping them up most nights. But even exhausted and covered in spit-up, Garrett felt a fierce love for this tiny person they had created. Watching Delilah with their son, the gentle way she cradled him and sang lullabies, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes, made him love her even more. As James grew into a toddler, bright and curious and getting into everything, life on the ranch continued its rhythm. The herd grew, the horses bred true and strong, and the ranch became known throughout the region for its quality stock. Garrett and Delilah worked side by side, partners in every sense, making decisions together and supporting each other through challenges. When James was 2, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the birth was easier, and they welcomed a daughter they named Charlotte, with her mother's dark hair and green eyes. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, and then finally, when Delilah was 30, a last daughter named Emma. The house that had once seemed too big for just Garrett was now full to bursting with noise and life and love. Garrett would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch his family, James helping his father with chores while trying to look grown up at 8 years old, Charlotte reading to her younger siblings in front of the fire, Delilah moving through the kitchen preparing dinner, and he would feel that same overwhelming contentment he had felt at that first Thanksgiving. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with the ranch work, going to school in town when the weather permitted. Garrett and Delilah taught them to be independent thinkers, to question and explore and choose their own paths, the same freedom they had both fought so hard for in their own lives. One evening, when the children were older and the oldest 3 had ridden into town for a dance, Garrett and Delilah sat on the porch watching the sunset. Emma was asleep inside, 10 years old and exhausted from a day of helping her mother in the garden. The air was warm with the promise of summer, and the prairie stretched out before them, their land, their home. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked, taking Delilah's hand in his. They were both in their 40s now, with lines on their faces from sun and laughter. But to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her, huddled against the cold. "Staying here instead of going on to Denver or back to St. Louis. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if you had made a different choice?" Delilah turned to look at him, and her green eyes were clear and certain. Not even for a moment. Every choice I made, from deciding to stay in Ellsworth to agreeing to work at the ranch to marrying you, has led me exactly where I am supposed to be. This life we built together, our children, this ranch, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me warmth that night in the blizzard, Garrett, but you have been giving me warmth every day since. You are my home, you and this family, and I thank God every day that you found me. Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, she could still move him to tears with her words, with the depth of love he saw in her eyes. I am the one who should be thankful, he said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it. You walked into my life during a storm and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. You challenged me and matched me and made me better than I ever was alone. I love you, Delilah Callahan, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. That is beautiful, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Did you make that up? I read it in a book Charlotte left lying around, he admitted, and they both laughed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear the lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, all the sounds that had become the soundtrack of their lives. I was thinking, Delilah said after a while, James will be heading off to college in a few years. He has his heart set on studying agriculture, so he can come back and modernize the ranch with new techniques. And Charlotte has been talking about becoming a teacher, wanting to start a proper school here in Ellsworth for all the ranch children. Thomas will probably stay and run the ranch with James, Garrett added. He has no interest in leaving, and Emma is only 10, who knows what she will want. My point is, Delilah said, our children are growing up and starting to find their own paths, but we still have so much life ahead of us. What do you want to do with it? Garrett considered the question. I want to keep doing exactly what we are doing, working this land, raising our family, growing old with you. Maybe travel a bit, show you Boston and introduce you to my grandfather if he is still alive. Maybe expand the ranch more, leave something substantial for our children and their children. But mostly, I just want more time with you. Every day we have together is a gift. I want that too, Delilah said softly. Every day with you is exactly where I want to be. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. James did go to college, studying the latest agricultural techniques and bringing them back to implement on the ranch. Charlotte became a teacher, opening a small school in Ellsworth that quickly became the pride of the community. Thomas took over more and more of the day-to-day ranch operations as Garrett grew older, though Garrett never fully retired, always needing to be out among the cattle and horses. And Emma surprised them all by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, one of the first women in the region to pursue such a career. Garrett and Delilah did make that trip to Boston when they were in their 50s. Garrett's grandfather was still alive, 90 years old and sharp as ever, and he took to Delilah immediately. They spent 2 weeks there, and while Garrett was glad to see his grandfather and show Delilah where he came from, he was even more glad to return home to Kansas. The city felt cramped and artificial after so many years on the open prairie, and both he and Delilah breathed easier once they were back on their ranch. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party, inviting what seemed like half the county. The ranch yard was decorated with lanterns and ribbons, tables groaned under the weight of food, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Garrett danced with his wife under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding night all those years ago. 25 years, Delilah marveled, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed to the music. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I would do it all again in a heartbeat," Garrett said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, as long as it was with you." "Always with me," Delilah agreed. "We are a team, you and I. We always have been, from that very first moment." As they grew older, Garrett and Delilah gradually handed over more responsibilities to their children. James and Thomas ran the ranch with skill and innovation, expanding it even further than Garrett had dreamed possible. Charlotte's school grew, eventually requiring 2 additional teachers. Emma completed her veterinary studies and returned to open a practice in Ellsworth, becoming an invaluable resource for all the ranchers in the area. Grandchildren arrived, first from James, who married a sweet woman from Dodge City, then Charlotte with her quiet but kind husband, then Thomas with his fiery wife who matched him in stubbornness. Even Emma eventually married, bringing home a fellow veterinarian she had met at school. The ranch house, which had been expanded twice over the years, was constantly full of children and noise and laughter. Garrett and Delilah settled into the role of grandparents with delight, spoiling their grandchildren shamelessly and telling them stories of the old days. The grandchildren loved hearing about how Grandma Delilah had nearly frozen in a blizzard, and how Grandpa Garrett had saved her, how she had learned to be a rancher despite knowing nothing about it, how they had fallen in love and built this empire together. One winter evening, when Garrett was 72 and Delilah was 70, they sat in front of the fire in their private sitting room. The house was quiet for once, all the grandchildren having gone home with their parents after a big Sunday dinner. Outside, snow was falling, gentle and soft, blanketing the ranch in white. "It reminds me of that first winter," Delilah said, watching the snow through the window. "When you found me." "I think about that day often," Garrett admitted. "What if I had taken a different route back to town? What if the storm had been just a little worse and I had not seen you? Our entire lives hung on such a slim chance." "I do not believe it was chance," Delilah said, turning to look at him. "I believe we were meant to find each other." Some force in the universe decided that Garrett Callahan and Delilah Matthews belonged together, and it arranged for a blizzard and a robbery and a desperate woman, and a good man to all be in the same place at the same time. It was fate. "You have always been the romantic one," Garrett said, but he was smiling. He reached over and took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years. Her hand was thin and veined now, marked with age spots, but to him it was still the most precious thing in the world. "I have a question for you," Delilah said. "If you could go back, knowing everything that was going to happen, all the hard times and challenges along with the good, would you still ride out into that storm? Would you still save me?" Garrett did not hesitate. "Every single time. In every possible version of events, I would choose you, Delilah. You are the best decision I ever made." Tears sparkled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "You were my warmth that night, Garrett, but you have been my warmth every day since. In the cold winters and the hot summers, in the hard times and the easy ones, through everything life has thrown at us, you have been my constant warmth, my safe place, my home." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn and the snow fall. Outside, the ranch they had built together stood strong, a testament to their love and hard work. Inside, the house held the echoes of decades of laughter and love, of children raised and grandchildren spoiled, of a life fully lived. Garrett thought about that young man he had been, riding through a blizzard 42 years ago, finding a half-frozen woman huddled against the cold. He had thought he was just saving a stranger's life, doing the decent thing that any good person would do. He had not known that he was finding his soulmate, his partner, the love of his life. He had not known that in saving her, he was also saving himself, filling a loneliness he had not even fully acknowledged. "I love you," he said, the words as necessary as breath, even after all these years. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Delilah replied, squeezing his hand. "Always and forever." They sat like that until the fire burned low, two people who had found each other in a storm and built a love that had weathered every season. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and silent, blanketing their world in white. But inside, there was only warmth, the warmth of a love that had lasted a lifetime and would echo through generations to come. The years that followed were gentle ones. Garrett and Delilah were content to let their children run the ranch while they enjoyed a peaceful retirement. They spent their days doing simple things, tending Delilah's extensive flower garden, taking slow rides around the property on their old faithful horses, playing with their grandchildren, and sitting on the porch watching the sunset. When Garrett was 79, he fell ill with pneumonia. It happened fast, a simple cold that turned into something much more serious. Delilah stayed by his side day and night, refusing to leave even when the children begged her to rest. Doc Morrison's successor, a young doctor named Fletcher who had studied back east, did everything he could, but Garrett's old body could not fight the infection. On a quiet morning in late spring, with Delilah holding his hand and all four of their children gathered around the bed, Garrett opened his eyes one last time. He looked at each of his children, his eyes full of love and pride, and then his gaze settled on Delilah. "My warmth," he whispered, so softly that only she could hear. "My love." "I am here," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. "I am right here, my darling." "Thank you," Garrett said, and his meaning was clear. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for staying. Thank you for every moment of our life together. I will wait for you." "Not too long," Delilah managed to say through her tears. "Save a place for me." Garrett smiled, that same warm smile that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago, and then his eyes closed and he was gone. Delilah lived for 3 more years, spending them surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She remained sharp and active, still working in her garden and telling stories and being the heart of the family. But there was a sadness in her eyes that had not been there before, a loneliness that nothing could quite fill. She missed Garrett with an ache that never fully subsided, missed his presence beside her, his hand in hers, his voice saying her name. On a cold January night, exactly 45 years to the day after Garrett had found her in the blizzard, Delilah went to sleep in the bed she had shared with her husband and did not wake up. The doctor said her heart simply stopped, that she had died peacefully in her sleep. But her children knew better. She had died of a broken heart, missing the man who had been her partner and love for over 4 decades. They buried her next to Garrett on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a wide sky. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county, all the people whose lives had been touched by this remarkable couple. Stories were told of their kindness and generosity, of how they had built not just a ranch but a community, of the love that had been evident to anyone who saw them together. James, now in his 60s himself and the patriarch of the family, stood at his mother's grave after everyone else had left. His siblings stood with him, along with their spouses and children and even some grandchildren. 4 generations of the family that Garrett and Delilah had created. They had something special, Charlotte said softly, a love that most people only dream about. "They built this," Thomas added, gesturing to the ranch spread out below them. "All of this together. It is their legacy." "The ranch is part of it," Emma said, But the real legacy is this family. The way they loved each other, the way they loved us, that is what they really left behind. James nodded, thinking of his father riding through a blizzard to save a stranger, of his mother choosing to stay and build a life in a place so different from what she had known. They taught us that love is a choice you make every day. That real partnership means working together, supporting each other, choosing each other over and over again. That is their gift to us. The family stood together on the hill as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Below them, the ranch bustled with life. Cattle grazing in the fields, horses running in the pastures. The house full of another generation growing up in the warmth and love that Garrett and Delilah had created. And if on cold winter nights when the wind howled and the snow fell, the current inhabitants of the house sometimes caught a glimpse of two figures sitting by the fire, hands clasped and heads bent together, well, no one was surprised. Love like that did not simply end. It echoed through time, a warmth that could never truly fade, a testament to what two people could build when they found each other in a storm and chose to weather every season together. The ranch continued to prosper, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own innovations while honoring the foundation that Garrett and Delilah had laid. The story of how it all began, of a cowboy riding through a blizzard and a woman huddled against the cold, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about courage and kindness, about taking chances and building something from nothing, but most of all, it was a story about love, the kind of deep, true, lasting love that changes everything it touches. And that story, that love, that warmth, lived on forever in the land they had claimed, the family they had created, and the legacy they had left behind. It was a love story for the ages, born in the harsh reality of the Wild West but tender and true enough to last beyond a lifetime. A beacon of warmth in the cold, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of kindness and grow into something more beautiful and enduring than anyone could have imagined.